Spring 1942, Eastern Front, sector near Kharkov, Soviet 62nd Rifle Division holds positions along a series of shallow trenches dug into the black earth of Ukraine, the ground still wet from melting snow, air temperature 6 degrees Celsius, wind from the northeast carrying the smell of cordite and turned earth. Soldiers huddle in groups of 4 or 5, smoking Makorka tobacco, cleaning rifles, checking ammunition pouches. Most are conscripts from the winter call-up, ages 19 to 30. 5. Many have never seen combat beyond the chaotic retreats of 1941. They wear padded jackets and wool caps, boots wrapped in rags against the cold. Rifles are Mosin-Nagant 1891-30 pattern, 5-round magazine, bolt action, rate of fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute for an experienced rifleman, 10 for the newer men. The company has one Degtyaryov DP-27 light machine gun, circular pan magazine holding 47 rounds, rate of fire approximately 600 rounds per minute in short bursts to prevent overheating. The gunner is a veteran from the Finnish War, careful with his weapon, knows it jams if fired too long without pause. Dawn breaks slowly, gray light spreading across no man's land, distance to German positions approximately 400 meters, the space between is open ground, former wheat fields now cratered and scorched, a few blackened tree stumps, tangles of barbed wire. The Soviet company commander, a lieutenant aged 26, receives orders by field telephone at 0630 hours, attack scheduled for 0700, objective to advance 300 meters and secure the ruined farmhouse. Visible on the slight rise ahead, artillery preparation will begin at 0645, 15 minutes of bombardment, then infantry advance, standard tactics. The lieutenant passes the word to his platoon leaders, they pass it to squad leaders, soldiers check weapons again, fix bayonets, some write quick notes on scraps of paper, names and addresses, tuck them into pockets, others pray quietly, Orthodox crosses held in cold hands. 0645, Soviet artillery opens fire, 76 mm divisional guns and 122 mm howitzers position 3 km behind the lines, shells whistle overhead, impacts walk across the German positions, explosions raise columns of black earth and smoke. The bombardment is thin, ammunition rationed severely after the winter battles, approximately 2 shells per meter of front. German doctrine calls for 10 times that concentration, but the Soviet gunners do what they can. The shelling continues for 15 minutes exactly, then stops. Silence falls except for the ringing in ears, whistles blow along the Soviet trench line, officers shout commands, soldiers climb out of trenches, form into loose lines, begin walking forward across the open ground. The German positions appear quiet, smoke drifts across the landscape, craters steam in the morning cold. Perhaps the bombardment was effective, perhaps the Germans withdrew. The Soviet infantry walk steadily, not running, conserving energy for the assault, spacing roughly 5 meters between men, rifles held at port arms. The DP-27 gunner walks in the center of the formation, assistant gunner beside him carrying extra pan magazines in a canvas bag, distance covered 100 meters, then 150, still no response from German lines. Some soldiers begin to hope, perhaps this will be easy, perhaps they will survive. At 200 meters distance, the German positions erupt, not with rifle fire, not with the familiar chatter of the MG-42 machine guns the Soviets have learned to recognize, but with a new sound, a sound unlike anything heard before on this sector of the front. It begins as a single long ripping noise, like heavy canvas torn apart by giant hands, impossibly fast, impossibly sustained. The sound does not come in bursts, it does not pause, it simply continues, one continuous tearing shriek, the rate of fire so high that individual shots cannot be distinguished, they blend into a solid roar, a mechanical scream. This is the MG-42, Maschinengewehr 42, introduced into frontline service in the spring of 1942, manufactured primarily by Mauserwerke in Oberndorf and the Grossfuss Company in Dobeln, designed by Dr. Heinrich Vollmer and his team to replace the earlier MG-34. The new weapon features a simplified manufacturing process using stamped steel parts instead of machined components, reducing production time from 150 hours per weapon to 75 hours. The operating mechanism uses a roller-locked bolt system. Designed by Mauser engineer Louis Stang, allowing for an unprecedented rate of fire, the weapon fires 1,200 rounds per minute at minimum, up to 1,500 rounds per minute depending on ammunition and barrel temperature. This compares to 800 to 900 rounds per minute for the MG-34, 600 rounds per minute for the Soviet DP-27, 450 rounds per minute for the American Browning M1919. The MG-42 fires so fast that the human ear cannot process individual shots, 20 rounds per second, 25 at maximum. Rate, the sound merges into a continuous buzz. German soldiers call it Hitler's Buzzsaw. Soviet soldiers will have less pleasant names. The effect on the advancing Soviet infantry is immediate and catastrophic. Men fall in groups, 3 or 4 at a time, cut down by the stream of bullets. The MG-42 does not fire single shots at individual targets, it hoses areas with suppressive fire. The high rate of fire means that even a short burst of half a second releases 10 to 12 rounds, these spread in a cone pattern. The gunner does not aim at specific soldiers, he aims at zones, sweeping the barrel in controlled arcs. The bullets arrive so fast and so densely that dodging is impossible. Men throw themselves flat, pressing into the earth, trying to find cover in shell craters, behind bodies of fallen comrades. The advance stops completely within 30 seconds, the entire company pinned down in the open, unable to move forward or backward. According to Soviet after-action reports from the 62nd Rifle Division, dated May 1942, archived in the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense in Podolsk, the company suffers 43 casualties in the first 2 minutes of the engagement, killed or seriously wounded, out of an initial strength of 120 men, the report notes. Enemy employed new type of automatic weapon with exceptionally high rate of fire. Soldiers report sound unlike previous German machine guns, impossible to advance under such fire. The division commander requests immediate intelligence assessment of the new weapon. Within 2 weeks, captured examples and technical documentation begin to flow back to Soviet weapons research facilities. German field reports from the same period, archived in the Bundesarchiv Militararchiv in Freiburg, provide the perspective from the other side. One report from Infantry Regiment 194, 71st Infantry Division, dated April 1942, states the new MG-42 has proven highly effective in defensive operations. Rate of fire significantly exceeds the MG-34. Ammunition consumption has increased by approximately 40%, but the suppressive effect justifies this expenditure. Soviet infantry attacks break down at longer ranges than previously observed. Another report from June 1942 notes, the psychological effect of the weapon appears substantial. Prisoners report that their units refer to the MG-42 with various fearful nicknames. Morale impact may be as significant as the actual casualties inflicted. The sound is the key. Artillery kills more men. Mathematically, statistically, the numbers prove it. In the Battle of Stalingrad from August 1942 to February 1943, Soviet casualties from artillery and mortar fire exceed 60% of total losses. Machine gun fire accounts for perhaps 15 to 20%, yet soldiers fear the MG-42 more than the guns. The reason is psychological. Artillery anew enses itself, shells whistle overhead, soldiers hear them coming, have seconds to take cover. Artillery falls randomly, impersonally, chance determines who lives and dies, but the MG-42 is direct, immediate, personal. The gunner can see his targets, the targets can see the muzzle flash, there is no warning. The sound and the bullets arrive simultaneously, traveling at 760 meters per second, faster than sound itself. By the time a soldier hears the tearing roar, the bullets have already arrived, already passed through the space where he stands, hit or miss already determined. The sustained fire capability creates a sense of inevitability. Older machine guns fire in bursts, 5 to 10 rounds, pause, barrel change, reload. The pauses create hope, moments when soldiers can move, advance, retreat, but the MG-42 with its quick-change barrel system, with belted ammunition feeding from 50-round drums or 250-round boxes, can maintain fire almost continuously. One gunner fires while another prepares the next belt. Barrels change in 5 seconds. A trained crew can sustain effective fire for minutes at a time. Soviet infantry doctrine from 1941 taught soldiers to advance during the pauses in machine gun fire, but against the MG-42 there are no pauses. The fire simply continues, unbroken, relentless, mechanical. July 1942, Voronezh Front, Soviet 40th Army attempts to dislodge German forces from positions along the Don River. The attack jumps off at dawn, 3 rifle divisions advancing on a 6-kilometer front, standard Soviet tactics, masses of infantry supported by limited artillery. The Germans are elements of 4th Panzer Army, understrength after weeks of fighting but well positioned in prepared defenses. As the Soviet infantry cross the open ground toward the German lines, they encounter concentrated MG-42 fire. The sound carries across the battlefield, that distinctive tearing roar multiplied by dozens of weapons. Soviet soldiers who survived the attack describe the experience in statements recorded by political officers. One sergeant, age 23, from a Siberian rifle regiment, states, "The sound was everywhere, like the sky was being ripped apart. you could not think, could not hear commands. Men were falling, but you could not tell where the fire was coming from. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I tried to run forward, but my legs would not obey. I fell down and lay there, the ground jumping with bullet impacts all around. I could see the dust flying up. I thought I was already dead. Another soldier, a rifleman age 19, says, it was worse than the artillery at Kharkov. With artillery you hear it coming, you have time to be afraid but also time to react. With this weapon there is no time, just the sound and men falling. I saw my squad leader cut in half, just cut in half, the bullets so close together they acted like a saw. These statements, recorded in battalion political summaries and forwarded to front headquarters, begin to accumulate through the summer of 1942. Commanders note a pattern of reduced offensive effectiveness when units encounter concentrated MG-42 fire. Attacks that should succeed according to doctrine and numerical superiority instead stall and break. Soldiers go to ground and refuse to advance despite orders and threats. This is not cowardice in the traditional sense. These are the same men who charged German positions armed with rifles against tanks, who held Stalingrad block by block in close combat. But something about the MG-42 breaks the will to advance in open ground. Soviet weapons researchers, working from captured examples and battlefield observations, produced technical assessments. One report from the main artillery directorate's technical department, dated August 1942, provides detailed specifications of the weapon: weight 11.5 kilograms without ammunition, length 1,220 mm, barrel length 533 mm, caliber 7.92 mm, using standard German 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser ammunition. The report notes the stamped steel construction, the quick-change barrel system using a simple latch mechanism, the belt feed system using non-disintegrating metallic belts, the roller-locked bolt operation. The report concludes this weapon represents a significant advance in machine gun design, combining high rate of fire with relative simplicity of manufacture. The psychological effect on infantry under fire appears to exceed its actual lethality. Recommend development of countermeasures and similar high rate of fire weapons for Red Army use. Countermeasures prove difficult. Soviet small arms development during the war focuses on submachine guns and semi-automatic rifles. Attempts to develop a comparable machine gun do not reach production before war's end. Instead, tactical doctrine adjusts. Infantry are instructed to advance in shorter rushes, to use smoke more extensively, to coordinate advances more closely with artillery and armor support. But these adjustments only partially address the problem. The fundamental issue remains. Infantry crossing open ground remain vulnerable, and the MG-42 remains terrifyingly effective at exploiting that vulnerability. August 1942, Stalingrad, the German 6th Army pushes into the city. Soviet 62nd Army defends street by street, house by house. The nature of urban combat changes the equation. In the close confines of ruined buildings and rubble-choked streets, the MG-42's long-range suppressive fire becomes less dominant. Engagement ranges drop to 50 meters or less, often much less. Room-to-room fighting, grenade exchanges, close assaults. Here the Soviet submachine guns, the PPSH-41 with its 71-round drum magazine, prove effective. The Germans still employ the MG-42 but differently, positioned in buildings to cover street approaches, set up in windows and doorways, firing down long sight lines when they exist. Even in this environment, the weapon retains its psychological impact. Soviet soldiers advancing through streets under MG-42 fire describe the sound echoing between ruined walls, amplified, disorienting, impossible to locate precisely. One survivor account from a Stalingrad veteran, recorded in the 1960s for a Soviet historical commission, states, "In the open steppe we feared it. In the city we hated it but also respected it. You learn to recognize the sound instantly, different from any other weapon. When you heard it you knew someone was about to die, probably several someones. You moved differently, thought differently, the whole tempo of combat changed. Everything became about avoiding that sound, getting close enough that it could not be used effectively, killing the crew before they could bring it to bear." The German crews operating the MG-42 developed their own relationship with the weapon. It is heavy, requires a crew of 3 to operate effectively: gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition carrier. The high rate of fire means ammunition consumption is extreme. A single 250-round belt lasts 10 seconds at maximum rate of fire, 15 seconds at sustained rate. Crews learn to fire in shorter bursts, 3 to 5 rounds when engaging individual targets, 10 to 15 rounds when suppressing an Area, longer bursts only when engaging massed infantry or for final protective fires. The barrels overheat quickly despite the quick-change system. A barrel can fire approximately 250 rounds before requiring change. Experienced crews carry multiple barrels, change them in rotation. German training documents emphasize the MG-42 as the center of the infantry squad. German infantry doctrine organizes the 10-man squad around the machine gun. The gunner and assistant gunner are the most critical members. The riflemen exist primarily to protect the gun crew and carry additional ammunition. This differs from Soviet doctrine where the machine gun supports the rifleman, and from American doctrine where the squad leader is the central figure. For the Germans, the squad fights to positions where the MG-42 can engage effectively, the rifleman maneuver, the machine gun destroys. Winter 1942 to 1943, the steppe freezes, temperatures drop to -30°C, the MG-42 continues to function, its design proves robust under winter conditions, the simple operating mechanism, the stamped parts, the loose tolerances, all contribute to reliability. Some Soviet weapons, more finely machined, more tightly fitted, struggle in the extreme cold. Oil freezes, parts bind, but the MG-42 keeps firing. German after-action reports note minimal stoppages due to cold weather. Ammunition feed problems occur occasionally when belts freeze together, but the weapon itself remains reliable. February 1943, after the German defeat at Stalingrad, Soviet forces push westward in Operation Little Saturn and subsequent offensives. Now it is German infantry conducting defensive operations, holding lines against Soviet attacks. The MG-42 proves as effective in defense as it was during the German advance, perhaps more so. Defensive positions can be prepared, fields of fire cleared, ammunition stockpiled, interlocking fire zones established. Soviet infantry attacks against prepared German defenses suffer heavy casualties. The same pattern repeats: artillery preparation, infantry advance, MG-42 fire, Soviet infantry pinned down or forced back. Soviet casualties from machine gun fire in offensive operations during the winter and spring of 1943 increase proportionally as more German units receive the MG-42 to replace their older MG-34s. Production at Mauser and Grossfuss facilities runs at maximum capacity, approximately 250,000 MG-42s produced in 1943, another 350,000 in 1944. The weapon becomes ubiquitous on the Eastern Front. Every encounter with German infantry means encountering the MG-42. Its sound becomes part of the auditory landscape of the war, as recognizable as the Katyusha rocket launcher's shriek or the Stuka's siren. July 1943, Kursk, Operation Citadel, the last major German offensive in the east. Both sides know it is coming. The Soviets prepare defenses in depth, multiple trench lines, minefields, anti-tank positions, artillery concentrations. When the German attack begins on July 5, it advances into the most heavily defended position on earth. The Germans employ all available weapons, tanks, assault guns, artillery, aircraft, and infantry with MG-42s. The Soviet defenses hold, largely, casualties on both sides run into hundreds of thousands. In the defensive fighting at Kursk, the MG-42 performs its designed role. German infantry, when forced to defend, employ the machine guns to cover anti-tank positions, to guard flanks, to seal penetrations in the line. Soviet after-action reports from Kursk repeatedly note the difficulty of reducing German defensive positions due to concentrated machine gun fire. One report from 13th Army states, enemy infantry positions invariably include multiple automatic weapons with high rates of fire. Our attacking infantry suffer heavy casualties in the approach. Recommend increased use of smoke and additional artillery support directly on infantry positions rather than in preparatory bombardment. The Battle of Kursk marks the turning point. After July 1943, the Germans are in strategic retreat. The question is no longer if the Soviets will win but when. Yet the MG-42 remains a constant threat, a tactical problem that never fully resolves. German infantry in retreat fight defensive actions, delaying actions. The MG-42 is ideal for this. A single crew in a good position can hold up a company of infantry for hours, force the Soviets to deploy artillery, to maneuver around, to expend time and resources. The Germans trade space for time, and the MG-42 is the tool that makes the trade possible. Soldiers who survive the war carry the memory of the sound. Veterans interviewed decades later, Russian, German, American, all who fought on the Eastern Front, they remember the MG-42, the Germans with a kind of grim pride, the Soviets with a mixture of fear and respect. One Soviet veteran, interviewed in 1985, age 65, says, "I can still hear it. I heard it in my dreams for years after the war. that tearing sound, even now when I hear cloth ripping or a saw cutting wood, I think of it. Nothing else in the war sounded like that, nothing else made you feel so helpless. The numbers tell part of the story. German production records indicate 423,000 MG-42s manufactured between 1942 and 1945, approximately 3.5 billion rounds of 7.92 mm ammunition produced for the weapon. Soviet casualty records, incomplete and dispersed, suggest that machine gun fire accounted for 15 to 20% of battlefield casualties, artillery 60 to 65%, rifles and other small arms 10 to 15%, mines and other causes the remainder. By these numbers, artillery was indeed more lethal, but lethality is not the same as fear. The MG-42 killed fewer men than artillery but terrified more. The reason lies in human psychology, in how the brain processes threat. Artillery is random, impersonal, a shell lands or it does not, survival feels like luck, neither earned nor deserved, but the MG-42 is direct, aimed, purposeful. The bullets come from a specific point, fired by a specific man who can see you, who is trying to kill you specifically, even though the fire is suppressive rather than aimed, even though the gunner sprays areas rather than targeting individuals, it feels personal. And the sound, that continuous tearing roar, signals intent, aggressive, mechanical, unstoppable. The sustained nature of the fire creates a sense of inescapability. With slower weapons, with rifles, even with other machine guns that fire in bursts, there are gaps, moments of hope, chances to move, to fight back, but the MG-42's fire seems continuous, unending. It creates a psychological box, trapped in the open, unable to advance, unable to retreat, unable to do anything but press into the ground and hope. This passivity, this forced helplessness, erodes courage faster than active combat. In active combat, a soldier can fight, can shoot back, can feel like he has some control over his fate, but under MG-42 fire there is nothing to do but endure, and that is harder. Military psychologists after the war, studying combat stress and battle fatigue, identify sustained heavy fire as one of the primary factors in psychological breakdown. Soldiers can endure short periods of intense danger, but prolonged exposure to inescapable threat degrades performance and morale. The MG-42, with its ability to maintain fire far longer than other weapons, inflicts this kind of stress more effectively. It is not just a killer of bodies but a killer of will. The weapon continues in service after the war, adopted by the West German Bundeswehr as the MG-1, later modified to fire NATO 7.62 by 51 mm ammunition as the MG-3, still in service today in various armies. The design proves so effective that no fundamental improvement has been necessary for 80 years. The rate of fire reduced slightly in the MG-3 to 1,000 to 1,300 rounds per minute, to extend barrel life and reduce ammunition consumption, but the basic mechanism, the roller-locked bolt, the quick change barrel, the belt feed, all remain unchanged. Soldiers who face it in post-war conflicts, in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, report the same psychological effect, the same distinctive sound, the same instinctive fear response. The MG-3 in Pakistani service, the MG-42-59 in Austrian service, the Turkish MG-3, all produce that same tearing roar, all create that same suppressive effect. The weapon transcends its origins, becomes simply one of the most effective infantry weapons ever designed, effective not just in killing but in controlling, in suppressing, in dominating the battlefield. The comparison to artillery, the question of why the MG-42 terrified soldiers more than guns, resolves to this: artillery was more lethal but less personal, more random but less continua. Artillery could be sheltered from in trenches, in bunkers, its danger could be mitigated by fortification, but the MG-42 engaged infantry in the open, during the advance, during the attack, when soldiers were most vulnerable and most visible, when they were committed to action and could not hide. It punished movement, punished aggression, punished courage, and it did so with a sound that announced its presence, that could not be mistaken, that triggered an instant recognition of danger. The archives preserve the statistics, the production numbers, the technical specifications, the casualty figures, all the quantifiable data of war, but they also preserve something less tangible in the witness statements, the soldier accounts, the medical reports of psychological trauma. These documents record fear, record the human cost that does not appear in battle reports. One Soviet military psychiatrist, writing in 1944, notes in his records soldiers presenting with battle fatigue consistently report exposure to German automatic weapons fire as a triggering factor, specifically describe the sound of the weapon, the inability to escape or respond effectively, the sense of helplessness, recommend rotation of units away from sectors where such weapons are concentrated. The recommendation was impractical. By 1944 MG-42s were everywhere on the Eastern Front, there was no sector free of them. Soldiers simply had to endure, to learn to function despite the fear. Those who could not, who broke under the strain, were removed from the line, sent to rear areas, or in the Soviet system sometimes shot for cowardice. Though by late war the Soviets became more understanding of combat stress, recognized it as a medical condition rather than a moral failing, at least officially. German soldiers manning the MG-42 developed their own stress, the responsibility of being the squad's primary weapon, the knowledge that enemies would target them first if spotted, the physical strain of carrying the weapon and ammunition, the noise and concussion from firing thousands of rounds. Many German machine gunners suffered hearing damage. The MG-42, even with its relatively moderate recoil, produced significant muzzle blast. The sound pressure at the gunner's position was damaging over time, but the German gunners also took pride in their weapon, in their role. They knew they were feared, knew their weapon was superior. This knowledge sustained morale even as the strategic situation deteriorated. Spring 1945, the war in its final weeks, Soviet forces advancing into Germany itself. The Germans still fight, still employ the MG-42, now in the defense of their homeland. The weapon appears in makeshift positions, in town squares, at crossroads, crude sometimes by old men and boys, the last desperate resistance. The Soviets by now have learned to deal with it: overwhelming artillery, massed armor, carefully coordinated infantry tactics, but still the sound carries across the battlefield. Still soldiers flinch at that tearing roar. The psychological effect persists even when the strategic situation is hopeless for Germany. The final days of the war see MG-42s firing until they run out of ammunition, until they are overrun, until their crews are killed or surrender. The last shots fired in Berlin, in Prague, in pockets of resistance that hold out past the official surrender. When the shooting finally stops in May 1945, hundreds of thousands of MG-42s are captured, confiscated, collected. Some are destroyed, some are stored, some are studied, some eventually find their way into service with other armies. The Soviet Union does not adopt the design directly, but elements of it influence their post-war machine gun development. The Americans study it extensively, consider adoption, ultimately stay with the Browning design but incorporate lessons learned. Silence falls across Europe. The archives fill with documents, reports, statistics, technical manuals, witness statements. All the paper record of industrial warfare. Buried in these files are the stories of the MG-42, of how one weapon came to embody fear for millions of soldiers, not because it was the most lethal, not because it killed the most men, but because it terrified in a specific and personal way, because its sound became synonymous with danger, because facing it required a kind of courage that even veteran soldiers found difficult to sustain. The weapon remains in museums now, examples preserved behind glass, cleaned and oiled and silent. The belts of ammunition beside them are inert, training rounds or dummies. The barrels are cold, the mechanisms frozen in place. Visitors read the plaques, learn the specifications, the rate of fire, the countries that used it, the battles where it appeared, but the plaques cannot convey the sound, cannot transmit the fear, cannot explain why soldiers decades later still dream of that tearing roar, still flinch at sudden loud noises, still remember the helplessness of lying in the open while the bullets snap past, while comrades fall, while the mechanical scream continues without pause. The answer to why the MG-42 terrified soldiers more than artillery lies not in statistics but in experience, in the difference between impersonal death from above and personal death from directly ahead, in the difference between random chance and aimed fire, in the difference between brief intense danger and prolonged inescapable threat. Artillery could be endured by hiding, by digging deep, by accepting randomness, but the MG-42 had to be endured in the open, under direct observation, with nowhere to hide and nothing to do but advance into it or break. And that choice, that terrible choice, repeated thousands of times across hundreds of battlefields over 4 years, left a mark deeper than any wound, a memory sharper than any pain. The sound of the buzzsaw, cutting through air and flesh and courage, the sound that defined fear for a generation of soldiers who learned that some things are worse than death. And being pinned helpless under MG-42 fire was one of them.